you need to be literate in AI. And if I narrow it to the area I'm working in today, literate in natural language. What that means is typically you don't need researchers. A lot of what you need to know about the language model is at the level of common sense, maybe the level of a data scientist that can work with data, understand it, play with it, and experiment with it.
Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Just sit back, relax, and learn from the leaders of today. It's a journey. Each one is different, unique, inspiring. Let's get started. 20-Minute Leaders is a proud supporter of Make-A-Wish Israel and Tech to Peace, and is in proud collaboration with Secret Chord Ventures, J Ventures, Riverside FM, Fusion VC, Birthright Excel, J Impact, Leap, Google for Startups, and Hippo, and in media partnership with CTech. Hello and welcome to a very special episode with Professor Yoav Shoham, one of the world's leading experts in computer science and today specifically natural language processing with AI21 Labs. Yoav Shoham is a professor emeritus of computer science at Stanford University. A leading AI expert, Professor Shoham is fellow of AAAI, ACM, and the Game Theory Society. Among his awards are the IJCAI Research Excellence Award, the AAAI ACM Allen Newell Award, and the ACM Tsigai Autonomous Agents Research Award. His online game theory course has been watched by close to 1 million people, and Professor Shoham has founded several AI companies, including Trading Dynamics, acquired by Ariba, Katango and Timeful, both acquired by Google, and AI21 Labs. Professor Shoham also chairs the AI Index Initiative, which tracks global AI activity and progress, and WeCode, a nonprofit initiative to train high-quality programmers from disadvantaged populations. Thank you, Yoav. I'm very excited to share this episode. Yoav, I'm trying to make sense of this world that we're in. Co-founder of AI21 Labs, you're both a leading research R&D vehicle. At the same time, you're also building tools for developers, like the developer platform, but you're also building products for enterprises and businesses. And so you're taking the most advanced cutting-edge natural language processing technologies and you're bringing them to real world. And this is not a trivial idea because we're still figuring out what are we doing with NLP and how is this going to integrate into our everyday life. So tell me a little bit about the founding of AI21 Labs and what sort of brought you into this world.
So AI21 Labs is an unusual company in a number of respects, and one of them is the reason we started the company. We started the company not because there was one particular problem we wanted to solve, but because where we saw AI in the historical perspective. If you go to a website called AIindex.org, this is a project that I started at Stanford about 5 years ago, and it puts out annual reports about the state of AI, both technological progress, but also just quantity of activity, whether it's the number of students taking classes or attendance at conferences or VC money or what have you. And all of those graphs are U-shaped. Back in the 80s, AI was very, very popular. Then back in the 90s, you weren't allowed to admit you were doing AI. And now
the AI winter.
And now my plumber is doing AI, but it's different, very different kind of AI. Back in the 80s, it was all about symbolic systems, how to represent knowledge, how to draw inferences, sometimes in logic, sometimes not. There was sometimes a probabilistic component, but machine learning was always there as an intellectual activity, but didn't play a key role, certainly not in any of the deployed systems. And wasn't as, people spoke about expert systems. It wasn't as bad as some people think, but it certainly overpromised, and therefore we entered what was called the AI winter. Now, the pendulum has swung back. Everybody's doing AI, but it's very different. Now, it's all about statistics, specifically under the heading of machine learning, and these days even more specifically deep learning. And it's amazing. What we can do now with machine learning is something that honestly, I think few of us imagined we could do. And the methods have evolved, but mostly we now have data at scales that are, again, were hard to imagine. And we have compute power that, again, is just infinite. And now you can do pattern recognition, object classification of all kinds incredibly reliably. And you saw the impact in machine vision first. And there, pattern recognition, object recognition is such a clear, present, and important problem that it was natural to tackle it. And you saw that there were advances that were dramatic. People speak about ImageNet, the collection of, now many thousands of photos where you can suddenly label the photos or cluster them and so on. You didn't see that dramatic impact in language until about 5 years ago. And the problem is that you don't have the analog of object recognition in language. When you think about it, vision is easy, quote unquote. To recognize that this is a bottle, it doesn't really matter what this pixel over here on the left is. But there's nothing local and simple in language. I sometimes say that machine vision is a lens into the human eye, and language is a lens into the human mind, because there's no thought as complicated as you'd like that you can't express in language. But that means it's also much harder for computers to make sense of language. But then we saw the needle start to move because of the particular brand of neural nets called transformers, as is well known. And then suddenly you saw the needle move. A lot of the academic benchmarks that kind of puttered along for a while, suddenly computers' approach sometimes exceeded human level performance. But the truth is that it's a little bit of an illusion. These so-called language models are incredibly powerful, and we'll speak about them. They do amazing things. They do enable things that are amazing, but they're also limited. If you go to a popular language model, for example, GPT-3 or our own Jurassic 1, and you ask it to complete sentences or to answer questions, they'll often do amazingly well. For example, surprisingly, you'll ask it to add 2-digit numbers, and it'll give you the right answer. You'll ask it whether in mathematical notation or in words, how much is 11 plus 12? Or you could even say, I had 11 apples and I bought 12 apples. How many apples do I have? And by and large, you'll get the right answer. You'll ask it to add 4-digit numbers, you'll get an equally confident answer that is total nonsense. Because these models really don't understand addition. They memorize many of the examples, the training data. They did some amount of generalization, but certainly don't understand arithmetic. And we have this amazing invention. We haven't announced it yet, but how to do addition. We call it the calculator. So really, in the 60s, HP gave us a calculator that does the job well. Why try to reinvent a wheel and come up with a crooked one? So mathematics is a simple example of reasoning that isn't natural for a neural net to engage in. Ask it to do other sorts of reasoning, temporal reasoning, spatial reasoning. It'll do some amount of it, but not robustly. Another problem is those language models understand. So remember, language models, the term is a little misleading because you initially might think it's a model that learns the rules of language, grammar and syntax and so on. And it does that, but it learns much, much more. It learns about the world as described by the text on which it was trained. And so you ask it, what is the capital of France? You'll get the right answer. You'll ask it who is the president of the United States. It'll tell you Donald Trump, because at the time of the training, that was the case. You might ask Donald Trump and it'll give you the same answer, but most people would not. And so it doesn't have access to current information. It certainly doesn't have access to proprietary private data. And we know how to access those things. And so we founded the company based on the premise, which we still believe in, that language models are necessary but not sufficient. We we can use these language models to do a lot of work, but we need to augment them with symbolic reasoning and access to real-time data and so on. So that's the reason we started the company.
So we're talking about a lot of these transformational ideas that we've had over the last 5 years. We've had these models exceed benchmarks, and we understand that it's not necessarily sufficient. And we obviously have the recent recent noise about sentience, etc. Where if I'm looking at AI21 Labs, you've positioned the company at the intersection of research, what you're talking about. You're advancing the state-of-the-art models, whether it be foundational models or specific use cases, but you're also creating offerings for the world. So tell me a little bit about balancing those two as a company, and then we'll dive deeper into the research-oriented aspects.
So I started by saying that we're an unusual company, and one respect is the reason we started the company. I discussed that. Another is what you're discussing. We decided early on, and I should say who we are. I started with my partner Ori Goshen, and very shortly afterwards, Amnon Shashua joined as a co-founder, not as just as an investor. And we did not want to just create a research lab. Nothing wrong with that, but we really wanted to create a large business. So the question is what products or services we wanted to build that relate to this deep technology that we were contemplating. And here, honestly, in an ironic way, we were limited because we looked at many applications. There's text everywhere. We looked at legal tech, at e-discovery. We looked at healthcare, electronic patient records. We looked at construction tech, mega projects where there's text all day. We looked at enterprise applications. We even had a prototype running in the enterprise that implemented a playbook for sales teams that rather than have a sales, a playbook that perhaps is read once by an incoming sales executive, if that, and never again, imagine a playbook that's live, that's reading your email with you, give you contextual advice based on the text. And what we realized pretty quickly was that all of these could be wonderful businesses, but they don't make enough contact with the types of innovation that we wanted to bring to bear. So in an ironic way, it limited us to applications that required this deep technology. And so our mission is to change how we produce and consume information, and specifically how we write and how we read. Because when we think about it, the way we write today is the way a product manager at Microsoft decided in 1980. And that's true even if you're writing in GDocs or Gmail, you have advances. You have collaboration, you have spell checking, you have autocomplete, but the fundamental experience hasn't changed. And when we think about reading, we're executing on the vision of Gutenberg from the 15th century with a printing press. Somebody put out a piece of paper or a screen and we look at it. And we think that both of these experiences, which are intertwined, by the way, can be radically rethought if you take AI as a basic building block and turn the machine into a thought partner in this creative process. And so that's our mission. And which means that we started out by building our own applications. A year and a half ago, we released our first product called WordTune, which focuses purely on the writing side. And honestly, it's a first step of a much longer road, the tail end of which looks like total science fiction, except it'll all be done in 2 years. But even this first step was fairly transformational. I can speak about WordTune because it's very different from other writing assistants that are out there.
And I want to delay for a second on what you just said. the long tail will look like science fiction, yet we're talking about a prism of 2 years. This is a really foundational idea that I'm trying to understand here. We have these remarkable advancements that are progressing so quickly, and we're breaking the benchmarks on almost a weekly basis at this point. How is the world going to respond or going to be impacted by, for example, the tale of wordtune, the science fiction, so to speak? How do you experience or consciously think about the way that teams around the world are going to experience NLP, enterprises are going to bring NLP into their work?
So NLP is a very broad umbrella. Really, language is an interface to everything, to the way between people, but also a new way to interact with machines. And so when we speak about the impact, it's a very broad discussion. If I limit a discussion of how it'll impact how we write, for example, just to make it narrower, maybe I can best explain it by an analogy. If you're writing a book or an article in a prestigious magazine, you used to have a copy editor. I don't know if the people still have it because machines do it well. Spell checking, grammar correction, that's commodity. You can do it. But you also have an editor. And the editor is really a thought partner. They look at it and their experience and say, listen, this part doesn't capture what you have in mind. Or these 2 paragraphs don't cohere, or this whole section isn't really adding to the story. This editor doesn't replace you, but it makes you a better version of yourself. And I think that's what we'll see in writing assistants, really a thought partner in the writing process. And that's just one case, writing.
Right. And obviously we have, what you mentioned in the beginning was this idea that these foundational models understand the information that we have, at least pertaining to the time that they were trained, in pretty significant ways, whether and these can come about in conversational AI, these can come about in contextual learning or within organizations' information. And so we'll see some transformative solutions over there, I'm sure, and I'm sure that AI21 Labs will have a piece of that as well. Going back to Jurassic 1, foundation models, and where we're at today in 2022, breaking the boundaries. Talk to me a little bit about symbolic reasoning as an idea where of in hybrid with deep learning to advance the boundaries of foundation models.
So first of all, Jurassic 1, the model we built, more than a year ago, is not neurosymbolic. It's purely a neural system, very much inspired by GPT-3. We were enthusiastic users of GPT-3. We're still big fans of OpenAI, but for a variety of reasons, we felt we needed to have our own model, and so it's a similar sort of model, so-called autoregressive left-to-right model. It has some important differences, but it didn't break the mold in fundamental ways. It's just a very good workhorse. It's still the only large model, and by large I mean more than 100 billion parameters, that's available to third parties to work with. But it was clear to us that that's the basic workhorse, a necessary but not sufficient condition. And so there's a variety of innovations in purely neural approaches, and they're important, and we can speak about them. Insights about tweaking the architecture, about training longer, about various attention mechanisms, all very important. Also, ways of interfacing these models through prompt engineering, prompt tuning, and other methods that try to coax out of this huge model information that is there, but wouldn't come out if you didn't goad the model into revealing it. But as I said at the beginning, we believe all of that is necessary, but not sufficient, because there are certain things that these neural models are not good for. They're not optimized for. Maybe if you let the neural net train for years and, multiply the size by 10 and their training time by 100 and spend not $30 million to train them, but, $1 billion, they'll generalize more and they'll learn all kinds of stuff that I'm sure will be interesting. It's not at all clear that they'll learn mathematics as we know it. But we know how to do mathematics. And so it seems so obvious to us that we should have the best of both worlds. Have the statistical inference and statistical access to world knowledge. I don't want to use the term understanding. That's a loaded term. But a good way to get at statistical knowledge, textual and also non-textual knowledge of the world, and augment it with structured knowledge, real-time information, and optimized reasoning that's optimized for certain islands of knowledge. And that's what Jurassic X is, which we announced a couple of months ago.
Phenomenal. So if you're looking at AI21 Labs as an entrance, right now you're mentioning that Jurassic 1 is still one of the only use cases for third parties to be able to interact with these large models. Where are we headed in terms of these foundation models? Very pragmatically in terms of applications for businesses and enterprises. So we have these large models. We know how expensive they are to train. We know that how difficult it is it's not that any research team and any organization can go ahead and train these models and create them. Is this something that we're expecting to have the integration of in the next couple of years? Do you expect that every small business will have access to create their own applications or to use sort of these black box applications by companies like AI21 Labs? How do you see the sort of the near future in terms of our use cases with these word models, these language models?
So the short answer is yes. These language models or foundation models, if you want to enlarge it to things that are not purely linguistic, are becoming much more generally available. They will become more so. Models such as Jurassic 1, a year from now, will be commodity. This is an area where you need to run to stay in place. And so the innovation will continue at a fast pace. And increasingly, people, small businesses and large businesses, will incorporate them in all their offerings, in my opinion, because language is such a fundamental modality of interface. There's a question of who will train these models as they become increasingly expensive. Will it be a smaller and smaller set of organizations? There's also another issue, which is, I think, even more fundamental, is that these are early days. People don't really know how to work with these models, what they're good for and how best to use them. And really, what you have right now is akin to Henry Ford announcing his great invention, an engine, and selling an engine to people and say, go, have fun. They're quite removed from the value proposition that an actual user or developer or organization can relate to. And so I think what you'll see, two things. You'll see these models get not only more sophisticated, but also enveloped in layers that make it much closer to the application, and you'll see the market get educated increasingly. I think we're facing probably on the order of 2 years before there's more maturity, both on the side of the providers and consumers of NLP technology.
So I'm taking us 2 years into the future right now, and I'm looking at the creator economy as almost a metaphor for the creation of language, right? I mean, I think it suits perfectly here. I'm looking 2 years down the line when models like Jurassic 1 are commoditized and general access makes it easy for anybody to create content, change content, analyze content. What should we be doing now so that in 2 years down the line, we can use these effectively and responsibly? I'm thinking even general things like the way that we communicate information, news articles, public knowledge. What is truth? If a lot of people disseminate information that is semi-truth, right? How do you even think, as a cutting edge researcher here, who's pushing the boundaries and part of this running, how are you thinking through some of these questions?
I think there are several sort of questions folded into your question. You have to realize that, I'm sure you do, you can't easily generate content with current models. You can generate seemingly cogent and useful stuff. If you go and, prompt a model, you'll get surprisingly relevant things and a bunch of garbage. And I know an organization, a publisher, a very big publisher, who's been using a large language model with the thought of increasing the efficiency because they create a lot of content, so perhaps they can automate some of it. And what they found, all the savings they've had in the generation of the content is washed away by the need to prune, analyze, and vet the output of those, because they hallucinate, they don't make sense, they contradict themselves, and all of that. And so I think we have a way to go. And it's not only in creating better language models, understanding that language models are general facility on top of which you need to add a lot. So in our application, whether it's WordTune or WordTune Read, or we now have a very fun thing that doesn't even have a name, but if you can find it, it allows you to consume video more efficiently. And in all of those cases, the language model was a basis, essential, but definitely less than half of the work it took to actually provide, a writing assistant, a reading assistant, or a video skimmer. And so we have a lot of work to do, and it's not all about language models. There's a good kind of foundation model that Percy Liang and his many colleagues coined. Is not a bad term. It's a foundation, but a house needs more than a foundation. Foundation models are a good term because they do provide foundations for many applications that are based on focus on language. But when you build a house, a foundation is essential, but it's only part of the house. And to
100%.
basic engine, this foundation, and turn into a useful product or facility or what takes a lot more work. And that's something that I think perhaps some people don't realize, because it's easy to create fun demos. We just recently put out something called Ask Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Ask RBG, and it didn't push technology in interesting ways. We fine-tuned our model, really not exactly fine-tuned, but we trained the model so that it could mimic the style and content of what the late judge would have said in response to kind of legal questions. And it's fun, but our purpose for putting it out was not to, to tell the public, look how great AI is. That's part of it. But part of it is, buyer beware. It does wonderful things, and it's limited. And so, yeah, that's the foundation model.
I looked into it, and that was pretty awesome, I have to say. And I was constantly thinking in my head, wow, people's brains are being blown away right now, because this is one of the first use cases that we see this interacting into our daily life in a really meaningful way. And you're right. I mean, there is a lot of noise out there and a lot of conversation around what this means, and obviously the whole conversation of sentience, etc. And And I saw also something you posted on LinkedIn recently about this. And I think it was your quote. I hope I'm not misquoting you for somebody else, but I think in one of the articles about RBG's demo that you've had, you said, I don't want people to be disappointed by the underperformance of current AI, and I don't want them to monger fear. And I think it's a pretty powerful idea, which is really explaining what you're saying here is that we have to understand really where we are, what's limited. But my issue is, Yoav, is that the public doesn't really understand what's happening, right? I'm barely able to keep up with the academic research, and I barely understand myself the limitations and the potential of what we have. So if I'm looking now at how, businesses around the world are going to run to want to implement a lot of these tools because it'll give an edge in whatever we do. So what education do we need to provide, and at what layers do you think for organizations around the world in 2 years' time to be able to use these models effectively into our own use cases? Do we need new positions within organizations? Do we need every organization to have researchers on board or specific PMs dedicated for this? How do we integrate the world into a new place where now these language models are being able to be integrated into our everyday life?
It'll vary among organizations, of course, both in terms of their sophistication and their mission and their resources. But just as, personal computers started to infiltrate industry, it was clear that you needed to be literate in computing. You need to be literate in AI, and if I narrow it to the area I'm working in today, literate in natural language. What that means is typically you don't need researchers. A lot of what you need to know about the language model is at the level of common sense, maybe the level of a data scientist that can work with data, understand it, play with it, and experiment with it. And my advice when we put out Jurassic, we had 10,000 developers signed up. Honestly, it was overwhelming. We don't have time to speak with all of them on a kind of personal basis. But when we do, my advice is, first of all, dip your toes in the water. There's no substitute to experience. Dip your toes in the water. And second, think about the simplest use case in your business, your organization, where you have an intuition. It may not be the highest value. That's not important right now. But where the match with language is obvious, and err on the side of the simplest application. Don't necessarily rush to create a chatbot. Chatbots are hard. They don't really, well, I don't want to diss my colleague, but they don't work. Boy, if your dad here heard me say this, we have a problem. The listeners may not know that your dad is one of the foremost researchers in AI and runs the Google research activity in Israel. Is an amazing guy. But anyway, take a simple, for example, we had, I won't mention even the industry, but we had a company that had not a chatbot, but they had a simple dialogue, question answering to their offering to users. It was kind of brittle because they had a set of questions and canned answers, and the chance that a question would match exactly one of the their bank of questions was very low, but that really lends itself to language, to diversify the question and understand which question is perhaps closest, and diversify the answers, and that's an example of a relatively simple application that's well within the reach of current technology, and that doesn't call for a huge investment of resources or deep knowledge of natural language. So find a good problem, not the most complicated one, and start experimenting.
So Yoav, your an innovator and a researcher, what are you most excited about right now in natural language? Whether it's something that we have, something that we're working towards. When before you go to sleep and you're thinking to yourself, wow, what crazy world we're in. What are you most excited about for today or for the future?
To be honest, every day I go into the office, I'm blown away because people are doing such creative things. And every day I'm blown away by something that they're doing that I would not have thought of. And so it's not one thing. Um, it's um, it's the possibilities are so exciting. We're focused on a particular mission of helping you write and helping you read, and and the idea that I could go and jot down some of my ideas, and then the system will help me turn them into a whole narrative. Um, I find that exciting because I pride myself on how I express myself in writing. Um, and yet, you see this. I'll tell you a story. So one of my hobbies is wine, and the one of the best known critics in the wine critics in the world, and the best known British critic is Jancis Robinson, and she has this newsletter, and what they have is an annual short story competition, and and so we had this. It wasn't even a product. It was such a fun demo. Um, GPT-3, the initial demos were, write the first paragraph and it'll complete the whole story. But of course, it would invariably go and meander, and who knows where it goes. And so we said, rather than extrapolate from a starting point, why don't you give it the beginning and the end and have it interpolate between them? The thought was it'll give us more of a direction of where to go, and maybe it'll meander less. The system was called Haim, and by the way, it invented its own name. We gave it the prompt: "I'm a language generation system. My name is," and one assistant was Haim, um, so we chose the name Haim. Of course, we retrofitted an acronym. I think it was. What was it? I think it was halfway adequate interpolation machine. But then the natural next step was to build Heimke. Heimke is Heim with K endpoints. Rather than beginning and the end, build a whole bunch of, write a bunch of sentences. So that's what I did. I wrote, I think, 6 sentences about wine, and out came a whole story. And the system was interactive. You said, "Oh, I didn't like this. Try again, or make it shorter, make it longer." After a few tweaks like this, there was a story. It was kind of a fun story, and I sent it to her, and she published it. And that's so much fun to do. Now, that wasn't a product. We're not yet at the stage where you can do this really in real life. But when you think about the possibilities here, it's just it's so fun.
So Yoav, I can honestly, I'm feeling your excitement even through this remote podcast. But are you considering yourself more of a researcher, a mathematician, computer scientist, a creative entrepreneur? I mean, who really is Yoav Shoham? You've been a professor emeritus at Stanford for dozens of years. You've been pushing the boundaries of technology and research pretty much your whole life. Yet I'm hearing you talk with so much excitement and joy about the applications of what some of these inventions are doing. So how do you sort of see yourself in this world?
Well, it's not like they're mutually exclusive, right? The nice thing is we have this luxury of so we like to build stuff. The difference between being a scientist and being a creator. A scientist tries to understand God. A creator is God, and so we're trying to do both. It's a lot of fun to create. It's addictive. Once you've done it, there's no going back. It's a matter of personal taste. I have one of my best friends is maybe Israel's top mathematician, and he loves proving theorems, and he's amazing at it. Maybe because I'm not as amazing at it, I resorted to being a creator. So it's both, but it's creation based on deep principle, deep mathematics. So the combination appeals to me.
Yoav, thank you so much. Not just for this last 40 minutes, but for your work in general. I've been enjoying so much following the different things that you've been putting out there, both as a professor and researcher, but also as an entrepreneur. AI21 Labs is one of the most important companies today pushing the boundaries of NLP, which is undoubtedly revolutionizing the world, I think, in ways that very few around the world still understand. And I honestly can't wait to see in 2 years' time what will be of WordTune or any other product that AI21 Labs does, and how the world is going to respond to all of this. And I think we've raised some interesting questions here. We've only touched the surface on some of them, and I'm going to be thinking about them for much longer over these next 2 years. And I really appreciate your time and energy.
Well, let's talk again in 2 years.
100%. Thank you very, very much.